To begin with, I'm going to start off with talking about a space called ethical space that Willie Ermine speaks of within his context. And so this story is of ethical space is something I've been working with the story catchers. And the story catchers are also teaching me about this space and how to navigate and how to negotiate this space within a research context. So where I'm drawing my knowledge from comprises of teachings that my elders, my mentors, my teachers have passed on to me, and I've taken the time to formulate some understanding about them, and now I'm only just giving them back and continually working with those concepts, those old ways from the people. So along with those thoughts, I've come to learn there's processes to how knowledge is created. There's models out there that comprise of how we've come to know ourselves as Indigenous people. So models such as the teepee model, models such as the Sundance. Today I'm going to be touching up upon the Sweat Lodge, so the Crying Lodge. It's an old sacred ceremony that our people have turned to, many times throughout the centuries to seek knowledge, to seek what it means to be human. And so, from these processes, there's ceremonies that teach us about processes. There's stories that teach us about processes. There's songs that have processes, and there's even prayer, the element of prayer. There's a process to approach prayer. In some instances, there's approaches to help us understand what dreams are made of, and so models such as, again, I share the teepee model and the Sweat Lodge are just models, are two of many models that our people have come to learn how to navigate here on Mother Earth. So one example that I want to share with you that I've been working and walking along with the story catchers here in Saskatoon and throughout this project is of the Sweat Lodge, the Crying Lodge, the Neepee Lodge. I want to talk about this ceremony for a bit and make the links from a research context to a ceremonial context, and how the story catchers are walking themselves through this process. So it's becoming my pedagogical method for transformative research. So with that being stated, it's something tangible. It's something that they can work with their hands, work with their minds, their hearts, their spirits, their eyesight, their smell. So now they're able to bring in their five senses and work towards that sixth sense that some people talk about. I acknowledge it as your intuition. And so these sacred ceremonies helps us formulate, helps us give those foundations of what it means to be human. And so the Sweat Lodge has become one tool that I've been utilizing to help us navigate this through the research world. So it's a research terminology of a method, if you will. And so this method is going to help us navigate and teach us what it means to be a story catcher. And so it is the how behind the method that my methodologies come to be. And so the how is basically the methodology behind the method of the Sweat Lodge. So the Sweat Lodge just doesn't appear, and it just doesn't happen, and then by a snap of your fingers does it occur. There's many processes, there's many models that are in place for that sacred lodge to happen. And so something Willie Ermine in 1995 speaks of is only by understanding the physical world can we understand the intricacies of the inner space. And so when in terms of finding out what are those intricacies of inner space, one needs to begin to look in the mirror. One needs to begin to look in the past, to their elders, to their culture, to their people. And so when I share that, I'm laying out a process of how knowledge comes to be and how knowledge is worked. So in terms of how I teach the story catchers, my pedagogy, my indigenous methodologies become my instructions. And so this is how I'm able to break down how I utilize that crying lodge, that sweat lodge, which is my method. So like I shared, gathering the wood, gathering the grandfathers, getting the water, getting the feast food, those are separate methodologies that comprise of that sweat lodge. So behind my methodologies are my instructions of how to conduct myself and how to pass those small teachings on to the next sentient being, meaning the story catchers. So those instructions derive from the ceremonies that I've attended to. This is where the knowledge was born. This is where I was able to walk with my elders, walk with my helpers, my brothers and sisters, my Sundance family, for example. Our sacred acts within those ceremonies, those are what teaches us how to be human, how to conduct ourselves as those sentient beings. So my role, how I define my role, is first and foremost as I see myself as a helper. On paper, you could put me down as a mentor, as a site coordinator, but I see myself as a helper, a scapulos first and foremost. And that terminology that brings in a lot of my teachers, my predecessors before me, my elders, even my friends. For example, they've been great teachers to me, so I get the beautiful opportunity to bring that into the research field, to bring that into learning and working with this concept of story catcher. And so my role allows me to put on different hats, if you will, and going back with my hopes and my aims and my end in mind of how to work and how to negotiate this ethical space of what it means to be a story catcher is answering the whys, or doing my best for that fact. If I'm answering the whys behind what we're doing, what we're learning about what it means to be a story catcher / research assistant. And so the importance behind what they're learning comes from being mindful that I'm constantly working within my own medicine wheel as I teach and walk with them. And I also reflect upon the idea that it's not an I thing, it's not an only me in this story. This story comprises of their stories, this story comprises of their medicine wheels. And so while I'm drawn from my own medicine wheel in terms of what I've learned and what's worked and what hasn't worked, it is my sacred story that I'm basically walking and teaching from. And so that in itself comes with responsibilities and accountabilities, and utilizing that phrase, ethics of non-interference. So believing in my teachers, believing in my mentors, believing in the elders and what stories they've shared with me, believing in those ceremonies first and foremost, that when I'm attending a ceremony, not to go in with expectations, but to expect nothing and to accept everything. And even that acceptance is a hard teacher in itself. And so, going back to my own story, when I was not receiving the whys behind any instruction that I was given and or rule that I was given, when I got older, it became there was a conflict within self because I didn't receive a lot of information. There was a big gap of information that I was missing, and so my own medicine wheel became hindered in terms of how I was growing and understanding things.